25 disturbing moments, 7 levels. Family Guy has never been afraid of a little controversy, but these moments are something else. We'll start with some of the more gross moments, but the deeper we get, the more genuinely unsettling and sick the moments will get. Let's start at the tip of the iceberg. Level 1. Broken Nose Brian, Season 13, Episode 4. Brian the Closer opens with a scene of Brian and Peter fighting over an old rope toy. When he realizes he's losing, Peter ties the toy to his car, ignoring Brian's grip. He floors it, dragging Brian until a sharp turn sends him flying face first into a fire hydrant in an insanely violent, graphic moment. Now Brian's teeth are shattered, his nose is fractured, and his face is left unrecognizable. But here's where things take a turn. The Griffins refuse to pay for his dental work, dismissing Brian's misery as not worth the cost. At the bar, Quagmire, of all people, gives Brian his dentist's number, letting him use his account for the repair. Which means, yes, Brian now has a new set of huge, gleaming teeth. His smile is so unnaturally white and oversized that it unsettles literally everyone, but it also opens unexpected doors. People start treating him differently. A Starbucks barista flirts, birds literally form a smile overhead, and a real estate agent mistakes him for one of their own and offers him a job on the spot. So now Brian jumps into real estate because his new teeth has given him a newfound confidence. But the episode leans into the creepiness of the situation. Brian's new look is so off-putting it's hard to look away, and his sales tactics are slimy at best. He sells a cliffside house to Bonnie, a lakeside property to Jason Voorhees, and finally a condemned condo to Quagmire, manipulating the guy who literally gave him those chompers. When Quagmire realizes he's been tricked, Brian avoids the confrontation until the contract's escape window closes. So what is Quagmire to do? He smashes Brian's new teeth out, ending his brief, unsettling run in real estate. The family mocks Brian's failed safety net job, which is cruel in its own right, and everybody just shrugs the whole thing off. Stewie's Maggot-Infested Wound, Season 8, Episode 15. In Brian Griffin's House of Pain, the subplot with Stewie is bizarrely cruel and extremely graphic, more so than usual. It starts with a simple accident as Meg chases Chris, they collide with Stewie and he tumbles down the stairs. But Stewie has a very nasty head wound with a lot of blood. Chris and Meg scramble to hide the damage they caused, propping Stewie up with a hat to cover the gash, even tying strings to his limbs to fake movement, which is weird, frankly. But the wound is visibly severe, and the show doesn't shy away from showing the cut, the swelling, and the unconscious body as it progressively gets worse. Peter joins in, suggesting they keep the secret, and the injury festers as the episode goes on. Even festers doesn't feel like a strong enough word to describe what happens, actually. Stewie remains motionless, but his wound worsens. We have to watch as the injury on his head gets worse and worse until the flesh starts to break down. At one point, a raccoon is drawn to the smell and bites into Stewie's head, literally just takes a chunk out. Gross. The episode leans into the graphic visuals as the wound rots, the skin discolors, and eventually bugs appear, crawling in the open gash. I would say it might be one of the most disturbing things the show has ever presented to us. The episode never lets up on the grotesque detail until Meg finally insists Stewie needs a hospital. For a show known for being so irreverent and inappropriate, this subplot is a rare moment where the visuals are so explicit, so drawn out, that it becomes genuinely disturbing. Even that feels like an understatement. Level 2. Patriot Games ATM Rage, Season 4, Episode 20. In Patriot Games, the B-plot kicks off when Stewie decides to start a sports betting operation. He takes a $50 wager from Brian on a pretty insane celebrity boxing match, Mike Tyson versus Carol Channing. Brian bets on Tyson because why wouldn't you, but Channing wins after repeatedly getting up and Tyson collapses from exhaustion. Stewie comes to collect, but Brian laughs it off, dismissing Stewie's demand for payment and asking for more time. Fat chance. Stewie gives Brian a 24-hour deadline, but when Brian still doesn't pay, Stewie shows up again, this time making it clear he's not joking. Stewie smashes a glass of orange juice over Brian's head, beats him with a towel rack, and slams his head into the toilet. Stewie's not going to stop until he gets his money, even if he maybe has to kill Brian to do it. So obviously Brian tries to avoid Stewie, even going so far as to wear a fake mustache, but Stewie sees right through it. But the next attack is even more extreme. Stewie pushes Brian down the stairs, beats him with a golf club, shoots him in both knees, and then sets him on fire with a flamethrower. Which actually is about what you would expect from a fight on this show. Eventually, Brian gives in and pays. Stewie, satisfied, offers Brian a free revenge shot. So Brian keeps Stewie in suspense, never saying when it will happen. Stewie becomes paranoid, beating himself up to try to get it over with, until finally Brian, without warning, shoves Stewie in front of a moving bus. I mean, geez, that'll teach him a lesson at least. Seahorse Seashell Terror Trip, Season 10, Episode 2. Seahorse Seashell Party follows Brian on the trip of his life after he consumes a pile of psychedelic mushrooms. From that point on, the episode takes a very strange and surreal turn unlike any other episode in the series. The colors in the Griffin house start to bleed into each other as the walls pulse and the floor ripples. Brian's eyes go wide as the furniture twists and stretches, shapes melting into each other. The entire episode is about to take a very strange turn, with Stewie's face morphing into a weird, nightmarish image. The show's usual bright, flat animation is now all shadow and weird coloring. Brian sees the family as horrific, gross-looking creatures, their voices pitched and warped. The sound design gets jagged with sharp noises and sudden silences. He stumbles through the house, chased by hallucinations. Objects he's known for years seem to lurch at him, and the food inside the fridge wriggles and writhes. Brian tries to run, but the hallway stretches out impossibly long, the walls closing in. This is just one long, nightmare-fueled episode. Eventually he manages to wake up, and everything goes back to normal as Stewie reminds us of the dangers of drugs. So maybe that makes up for all of the really, really weird stuff. Stewie vs. Lois. Arc. Season 6, Episodes 4 and 5. The two-part Family Guy episode, Stewie Kills Lois and Lois Kills Stewie, wastes no time with its premise. Stewie finally follows through on his long-running threats against his mother. It starts with Lois getting cruise tickets for her birthday. She brings Peter, leaving Stewie behind, which sets him off. He's always talked about getting rid of Lois, but this time Brian calls him out for never actually doing it, basically daring him. So Stewie decides to prove him wrong. He sneaks onto the cruise ship, confronts Lois alone on the deck, and opens fire with a submachine gun, sending her overboard. Now, Lois is gone, presumed dead, and the family is left to pick up the pieces. A year passes. Peter moves on, as we all expected him to do. Stewie, meanwhile, tries to cover his tracks, disposing of the weapon and evidence. But suspicion soon falls on Peter when Lois's life insurance is cashed in. When the police find Stewie's discarded weapon and incriminating drawings, they have their killer, Peter. Apparently, the handwriting matches Peter's, so he's arrested and put on trial for Lois's death, facing a life sentence. It comes dangerously close to happening until suddenly Lois bursts in alive and exposes Stewie as the real villain. But the second part escalates further. Stewie kidnaps Brian at gunpoint, takes over the world's power grid, and declares himself president. Lois arms herself and storms the White House, igniting a violent, drawn-out shootout with her own son. Lois hesitates to finish Stewie, but Peter arrives and shoots Stewie instead. And that's the end of Stewie. Almost. Just as the dust settles, the show pulls back to reveal Stewie is in a simulation chair, having run the entire scenario as a test. None of it really happened. The show pulls off a bait-and-switch, revealing the entire saga as a hypothetical, but not before pushing the story to its darkest extremes, a mother and child killing one another. But there's no bait-and-switch here. If you hit that subscribe button, you'll know exactly what you're going to get. More great videos like this one. Level 3. AIDS Barbershop Quartet, Season 4, Episode 5. The Cleveland Loretta Quagmire has a scene that is both iconic and extremely, horrifically tasteless. You know the one. In the middle of the episode, the show cuts away to a hospital room where a doctor, unable to deliver devastating news himself, calls in Peter and a barbershop quartet. They burst in, dressed in matching outfits, and launch into a cheerful, tightly choreographed musical number. The lyrics are blunt. You have AIDS, yes, you have AIDS. I hate to tell you, boy, that you have AIDS. You got the AIDS. The song continues, listing possible ways the patient might have contracted the disease, all while the group harmonizes and dances around his bed, smiling and jauntily snapping their fingers. Because of how upbeat the song and tone are, the news sounds like a joke. The patient, gaunt and bedridden, looks on in confusion and horror as the quartet finishes the song with a flourish. This single scene caused so much outrage among viewers who believed the show had crossed a line by making light of a deadly disease. AIDS service organizations and activists were quick to speak out, condemning the show for trivializing a serious illness that has affected millions. Groups like the AIDS Institute and Action AIDS demanded an apology, saying the scene was insensitive to those living with HIV and their loved ones. Nobody really followed through. After all, everybody knows about Family Guy's willingness to use even the darkest subjects for laughs, regardless of the pain it might cause. It's kind of the whole show. Vietnam Wall Mockery, Season 8, Episode 19. In The Splendid Source, Peter and his friends set out on a road trip, chasing the origin of a joke. Their journey takes them through Washington, D.C., where they pass the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, which is obviously the perfect place for a wholly insensitive joke. Peter points out a Vietnamese man at the memorial who is loudly mocking two American veterans standing at the wall. The man calls the memorial a scoreboard, flashing a loser sign at the veterans, then pointing to a name and claims, "Hey, I know that guy. I kill him. He cry like a bitch."
Hey, I know that guy. I kill him. He cry like a bitch.
Given the kind of show Family Guy is and has always been, there's no way you can be surprised by the show's decision to make this joke, but it is a pretty bold, crazy line to throw in there. At this point, the show has caused so much offense that they don't really care, but the line is dismissed as per usual, snapping back to the main plot as if nothing happened. Quagmire's Control Fantasy, Season 12, Episode 3. Quagmire's Quagmire starts with Quagmire meeting Sonia, a woman who seems to match him in every way. She's just as uninhibited, just as eager to push boundaries. You know, a female version of him, so to speak. Which is exactly what Quagmire thinks he's always wanted. They hit it off, and their first night together ends with Quagmire waking up handcuffed to the bed, having been twerked. But instead of being alarmed, he's convinced he's finally found his soulmate. He brags about Sonia to his friends, but Peter and Joe warn him that things might be going a little bit too far. Quagmire, however, is too in love to notice or care. Their relationship escalates with Sonia orchestrating situations that go beyond anything Quagmire has experienced, including forcing him into a very uncomfortable scenario with his own father. Suddenly, Quagmire starts showing up with visible injuries, hiding black eyes behind sunglasses, and clearly trying to make himself look like he isn't being abused. Peter and Joe notice what's going on, but Quagmire brushes off their concern, afraid Sonia might overhear and hurt him. After leaving the bar one night, Sonia ambushes Quagmire, beats him, and locks him in his own car trunk. She says she's giving him what he wants, total domination and humiliation. But she drives off with him, and Quagmire disappears for days. When his friends and his father go hunting through the city's underbelly, they hear rumors about Sonia's reputation and eventually find Quagmire suspended, bruised, and gagged in a storage container set up as a dungeon. Which is an insane scene, much more depraved than we usually get from Quagmire. Fortunately, when Sonia tries to shoot his friends, her gun isn't loaded. Joe subdues her, and Quagmire is freed, battered, and shaken. But it's obvious that the situation could have gone a lot further if she had been given the opportunity. Saving Private Brian, Knife Threat, Season 5, Episode 4. Saving Private Brian has a really strange tonal shift, even for a Family Guy episode. The episode begins with Stewie and Brian accidentally enlisting in the army, getting shipped to Iraq, and desperately trying to get themselves discharged. They're wounded and hopeless. They've shot each other in the feet trying to get Purple Hearts, only to learn that injuries don't guarantee a ticket home anymore. The commanding officer casually mentions they have 2 dead guys guarding the ammunition. Then comes the announcement that changes everything. An officer approaches with what should be celebratory news. Great news, everybody! Democracy just kicked in. Finally, they're on their way out. But Brian questions whether it's really over. Why would the war end so abruptly? Suddenly, the show cuts away from the relieved soldiers to reveal the true cost of this democracy. An Iraqi man has a blade held to his throat, his face frozen in terror. There's not really any joke to this, it's just there. He seems to know what's coming, but the show has no punchline. It's just a very blunt moment to show us that democracy doesn't mean freedom for everybody. Political change often comes at the cost of individual lives, and someone's freedom can be another person's end. Kinda deep for Family Guy, don't you think? It's one of the rare times that Family Guy shocks us as the audience without even making a joke about it. We don't get any comfort about what happens to the guy, we just have to sit and accept what we saw and move on. Herbert's Creepy Family Dream, Season 4, Episode 16. In The Courtship of Stewie's Father, the character of Herbert the pervert hits a new low in his creepy obsession with Chris. The episode's main plot follows Peter's attempts to bond with Stewie by hurting Lois, while the subplot centers on Chris breaking Herbert's window and being forced to work off the debt through household chores. Of course, Herbert takes full advantage of that situation. Throughout the episode, Herbert engages in increasingly inappropriate behavior toward Chris, encouraging him to take off his shirt and eventually taking Chris out to dinner. Then we get to see inside this old pervert's head. In a fantasy sequence, we shift into a cheesy 1960s sitcom where Herbert imagines himself as Chris's wife in a domestic setting. He's a woman in this fantasy, singing a parody of Somewhere That's Green, as he envisions an entire life with Chris, including kids and all. The sequence is styled like classic television shows from that era, complete with a wholesome aesthetic that makes the idea even more weird. Given how Herbert manipulates Chris throughout the episode, it's pretty obvious how disturbing this whole thing is. His eagerness to have Chris work around his house, combined with his previously established character as a notorious, registered offender, makes it feel kind of unsettling. The cutaway gag is one of the show's most explicit explorations of Herbert's character, using the familiar format of 1960s family sitcoms to highlight how messed up he truly is. The episode ends with Herbert alone in his living room, switching to coverage of the Little League World Series with obvious satisfaction. So there's no question or doubt about his true intentions. Level 4. Prom Night Dumpster Baby, Season 5, Episode 12. The episode Airport 07 features one of Family Guy's most iconic and controversial cutaways in the show's history. A teenage girl steps away from her school dance, dropping a paper bag into a dumpster outside. Her date calls out asking if she wants to dance, and she responds cheerfully, sure, before rushing back inside to rejoin the festivities. But then we discover that inside the trash can, her abandoned newborn baby emerges from the garbage and begins to sing a jazzy, Broadway-style song about his life as a prom night dumpster baby, all while twirling his umbilical cord like a walking cane. Soon, other abandoned babies join in as backup singers, creating an entire choreographed musical number among the trash. Many people watching this might not fully understand why this scene got as much controversy as it did, but it's not just the fact that it's a newborn baby being thrown out, it's because it's very, very close to a real-life incident. In 1997, 18-year-old Melissa Drexler attended her senior prom at Lacey Township High School in New Jersey, having hidden her pregnancy from everyone, including her boyfriend and her family. During the dance, she complained of stomach cramps and went to the bathroom where she gave birth to a 6-pound, 6-ounce baby boy. After fishing him out of the toilet bowl, she placed him in a plastic bag and deposited him in a trash can. Then she touched up her makeup in the bathroom mirror before returning to the dance floor, as though nothing had happened. Family Guy essentially took this situation and turned it into a joke, as it tends to do with most things. The show's creators admitted they thought the segment would never make it past the writer's room, and even Mila Kunis, the voice of Meg Griffin, was surprised it aired, saying she thought there's no way that's getting on the air. Well, it did, and it was shocking. Brian Stewie's Teddy, Season 7, Episode 5. There's a lot of things you can say about new Brian, and they're all pretty accurate. He sucks, which is why his death in The Man with Two Brians was satisfying, if extremely shockingly violent. Initially, new Brian seems perfect and helpful to the family, but then new Brian starts telling Stewie that he's been humping Rupert, and that Rupert seems to like it. In his words, "I humped him for 2 hours yesterday, he just laid there and took it." You can kind of read between the lines there, but the very next scene cuts to Stewie handling the situation, dragging a large, bloody garbage bag to the curb. He leaves a note claiming that new Brian took his own life, but we know what truly happened. Stewie was protecting his best friend. Traumatized by what new Brian revealed about Rupert, Stuart frantically washes his teddy bear in the shower, hoping to clean it of the brutality. Weirdly enough, the actual body bag death stuff isn't even the most disturbing part of the episode. The casual way new Brian delivers his confession is far, far more horrific. He has no remorse or even understanding of what he's saying. He seems almost proud of his actions and deliberately cruel in how he frames them to maximize Stewie's distress. He's just another predator hiding as a friendly, nice guy. But his actions and his comfort with them end up leaving Stewie traumatized and desperate to restore the innocence that he and Rupert had before new Brian arrived to rip it away from them. Stewie Incinerator Tragedy, Season 11, Episode 19. Speaking of Rupert, Total Recall features a B-story where Stewie embarks on a rescue mission to save his beloved teddy bear from a toy factory recall. But it almost ends his life in the process. When the New England Toy and Game Company recalls teddy bears due to loose eyes creating a choking hazard, Lois dutifully sends Rupert back to the factory. But Stewie cannot accept the replacement giraffe toy and manipulates Brian into driving him to the factory for a rescue mission. When they get inside the factory, Stewie and Brian slip away during a tour and discover the recall room, where thousands of identical bears create what is frankly just a horrific landscape of sameness. Rupert isn't really unique, he's just one of thousands. Finding the actual Rupert amongst thousands of identical bears is nearly impossible. But just when all hope seems lost, he spots a conveyor belt feeding bears directly into a furnace, and there, about to be destroyed, is his real Rupert. In seconds, his childhood, the only thing that he truly loves without apology, is about to be completely burned to a crisp. So he jumps onto the moving conveyor belt, creating a life-or-death scenario that feels genuinely dangerous. He's willing to die himself if it means that he will be with Rupert. But in a truly moving moment, Brian does everything he can to stop the machinery with broken toys from the recall room, succeeding eventually. Stewie has Rupert, Brian saved Stewie, all is well. Almost. In his moment of pure joy at being reunited with Rupert, Stewie's celebration triggers the very danger the recall was meant to prevent. One of Rupert's eyes pops off and flies directly into Stewie's mouth, causing him to choke, suffocate, and die. Chris announces that Stewie is dead, and, well, that's the end of the story. Seriously, that's how they end things. It's pretty rough. Brian eats Stewie's poop. Season 8, Episode 17. In Brian and Stewie, our two favorite frenemies get stuck inside a locked bank vault. But what happens when you have a baby and a dog trapped in one place? Yep, one of them eventually has to poop. And it's Stewie whose diaper is full. That's just one problem. Stewie is developing a rash, he needs a clean diaper, which means... yeah, Brian tries to reason his way out of it, but Stewie's already thinking 3 steps ahead. He's holding a gun to Brian's safety deposit box, explaining that Brian needs to eat the poop so Stewie can reuse the diaper. Thankfully, the eating happens off camera, but we see Brian's face afterward. We see him chewing, swallowing, trying not to gag. Then finally comes the vomiting. Stewie throws up, watching Brian consume his waste, and suddenly there's more dessert. Brian actually considers that. He admits he likes vomit, has eaten it before, just not under these circumstances. I don't really want to think about that. But of course, this is not anywhere near the worst of it. There's still cleanup required. Stewie needs his bottom licked clean. No wipes, no tissues, Nothing but Brian's tongue. Brian protests that he could get sick, but Stewie's already decided this is happening. He needs to be clean. Look, this is a genuinely traumatic scene for anybody who has to watch it. Obviously, it's a very sweet moment of one friend helping another, but that doesn't mean it's truly horrific to have seen it all unfold. Ultimately, this is just a moment that shows how people will endure serious degradation and unpleasantness for those they care about. Level 5. Stewie's RPG Torture Chamber, Half Dog Babies. Season 13, Episode 12. Stewie is Esciente is one of the most hated episodes on the internet, and for very good reasons. It's horrific. The story begins as Brian's being pulled away from Stewie, spending more time on his phone than with his bestie. Noticing the distance, Stewie decides the solution is having a baby together, because watching Joe and Bonnie with their daughter Susie convinces him that babies strengthen relationships. So he builds a machine that takes Brian's DNA from hair and saliva samples, then injects it into himself through his belly button. When Brian finds out, he repeatedly punches Stewie in the stomach, hoping to kill the babies. But Stewie grows increasingly larger anyway, becoming more and more maternal as the countdown to childbirth continues. And finally, it happens. In a truly horrific scene, Stewie screams that babies are coming out of everywhere. Literally every single part of his body becomes a place for children to escape. Weird hybrid creatures, part human and part dog, crawling all over Stewie immediately after birth. 7 of them, to be exact. Some look more human, others more dog-like. Stewie immediately starts separating them, keeping the more attractive ones in one area while the others are relegated elsewhere. But their hybrid children have various birth defects. Some are blind, some are deaf, and at least one appears brain damaged. As the deformed hybrids start to try and eat one another, Brian and Stewie find it impossible to take care of them due to the cost. Realizing that their moods are affecting each other negatively, they abandon all 7 hybrid babies at an animal shelter, returning to their previous relationship as if nothing happened. The episode earned over 300 one-star reviews on IMDb, with many calling it disturbing, disgusting, and really, really messed up. It's maybe the most universally reviled episode in the series, with one of the worst premises ever conceived in Family Guy history. Lois's Dark Parenting Fantasy, Season 19, Episode 17. The young parent trap starts with Peter and Lois being mistaken for first-time millennial parents at Stewie's preschool. The real young parents invite them to hang out, and Lois jumps at the chance to be seen as young again. They move into a sleek apartment complex full of other so-called cool parents, dragging Stewie along and leaving Meg and Chris to fend for themselves at home. That is child neglect, yes, but the kids are left with a freezer full of confusing leftovers and no supervision, so I guess they'll be kind of happy. Peter and Lois dive into the millennial lifestyle, trying to keep up with the latest apps and drinks, surrounded by parents who treat raising kids more like a trend than a responsibility. Meanwhile, Meg and Chris, left behind, barely scrape by. The fridge empties out and the house gets weird fast. Eventually, they track their parents down, disguise themselves as a millennial couple, and infiltrate the apartment complex to expose the whole charade. But the comedy turns pitch black at the Coachella Music Festival. All the young parents, eager to party, leave their kids in the pool. The show cuts back later to reveal that Stewie is the only one left alive, trying to fish out the others with a net. Every other child is gone because their oblivious parents were too lost in their own self-absorption. The scene is actually very quick and clearly played for laughs, but man, that is dark. The episode ends with the adults none the wiser, so there's not even a real payoff to how dark things are getting here. By the way, in the year that episode aired, 2020, millennials were as old as 39, and with Peter and Lois being consistently referred to as in their early to mid-40s, that's kind of a weird premise, right? JFK Bobby Pez Cartridge Shootout. In A Hero Sits Next Door, there's a joke that is so inappropriate, even Seth MacFarlane has publicly said he would probably not make it today. When the police are involved in a shootout at a nearby bank, a kid walks out of a store holding a newly bought Pez dispenser in the shape of former President John F. Kennedy. A rogue bullet flies and shoots the Pez dispenser in the head, an obvious reference to the assassination of JFK. But the kid is unfazed. He said, "Good thing I have my Bobby Kennedy Pez dispenser." In case you're not aware, Bobby Kennedy was also shot and assassinated, so the implication here is fairly obvious. This Pez is also going to get it. In a 2012 interview, and oftentimes after that, Seth MacFarlane has refused to regret many of Family Guy's most shocking jokes, except for this one. On multiple occasions, he said that this joke is one he wishes he had not done, and is one that he would most likely not approve of if it came around today. He's never explained why this is the line he wouldn't cross, since the show seems to thrive on crossing boundaries like this, mocking the Boston bomber, multiple religious groups, celebrities, and presidents themselves. But apparently the joke was too far and something he very openly regrets. Episode: Partial Terms, unaired. Partial terms of endearment is something of a rarity in Family Guy history, an episode that has still never been aired in the US. The episode follows Lois, who meets Naomi, an old friend desperate for a favor. Naomi and her husband can't have a baby, so they ask Lois to be a surrogate. Peter's first reaction is excitement and confusion until he realizes what's happening. But Lois goes ahead with it anyway, going through the process of in vitro fertilization. The next morning, Lois is pregnant, and Peter, still outraged over the idea of carrying someone else's baby, tries everything to end the pregnancy, but nothing works. Then, the episode takes a sharp turn. Naomi and her husband have died in a car crash. Suddenly, Lois and Peter are left with a decision: bring the pregnancy to term and give the baby up, or end it early. Lois considers her options, ultimately deciding to end her pregnancy. When she visits a clinic, she faces a barrage of anti-abortion activists. Peter, after watching a manipulative video from the activist, tries to stop her, but Lois stands firm on her decision. Fox saw the script and refused to air the finished episode, saying the subject matter was too controversial, even for a show that thrived on pushing buttons. Adult Swim, which had previously aired the Christmas episode when Fox wouldn't, also refused to touch it. The episode eventually aired in the UK and was released on DVD. In fact, the response was overwhelmingly positive, with many people praising the show for not dodging the issue and taking the topic of abortion seriously and with surprising empathy. Very unusual for this show. Level 6. Brian encouraging suicide. Season 8, Episode 17. Brian and Stewie is a pretty stripped-back episode of Family Guy. We have our two leads stuck in a bank vault with very few cutaway gags or other outward jokes. It's just Brian and Stewie stuck together with nothing but time and whatever's in Brian's safety deposit box. As we've already covered, the tone of the episode shifts pretty wildly between gross-out humor to something much more serious. And one of the most shocking shifts comes when Stewie, after a string of escalating dares and arguments, discovers a gun in Brian's box. Stewie is obviously surprised to find the gun, but this isn't a setup for a punchline or a gag. After Stewie asks why he has this stored away, Brian tells Stewie in a flat, matter-of-fact way that he keeps it for himself just in case. Brian explains that he feels lost, that he can't find purpose, and that the gun is his way out if he ever needs it. The fact that he's even considering taking this route out is shocking in itself, especially since Brian, more often than not, is the most rational member of the family. It's a very, very dark moment that suddenly shifts when Stewie, who's spent most of the episode pushing Brian's buttons, tells Brian he cares about him, that he's his best friend, that he wouldn't know what to do without him. Considering that the episode has more or less been these two going at it, it's a seriously moving moment. Maybe actually the most honest moment the show has ever given these characters. When they stop bickering, they're able to have a genuine human moment with one another. Frozen Fear, Roofies at Home. Season 11, Episode 7. It seems like Meg isn't really anybody's favorite character, but the episode Friends Without Benefits made absolutely sure of that. Meg, obsessed with Kent, finally works up the nerve to ask him out. The only problem is that Kent isn't interested in Meg. He's more into her brother, Chris. Meg's devastation quickly turns to desperation as she tries to convince Kent he's just confused, but Kent is clear about what he wants and it isn't Meg. So Meg's friends, the few she has, suggest a disturbing workaround. If she can't have Kent, maybe she can at least hear about him through Chris. Meg asks Chris to sleep with Kent so she can get the details afterward, but Chris is horrified and refused even when Meg offers him money. Of course, Meg cannot accept defeat, so instead she turns to Quagmire for roofies, planning to Chris so Kent can be with him while Chris is unconscious. Quagmire hands over the without hesitation, barely fazed by the request. He's probably done this hundreds of times. Meg sets the plan in motion, telling Kent that Chris is interested but wants to pretend to be asleep. She prepares the Kool-Aid, but before she can go through with it, Chris gives her a childhood photo reminding her of their bond. At the last second, she dumps the drink into a plant instead of giving it to Chris, but Kent never gets the message that the plan is off. He sneaks into Chris's room only to find Chris awake and confused. When the truth comes out, both Kent and Chris are furious, and Kent storms out, calling Meg crazy. Understatement. The whole scheme is played for laughs, but lands as one of the show's darkest storylines. The idea of Meg drugging her brother so someone else can take advantage of him is deeply disturbing, and it's no surprise many viewers felt she went way too far. In fact, for many, this is the episode where her character was irredeemably ruined. Frankly, even if she tried to defend herself, I think all we would say is, shut up, Meg. Baby Susie and Sexual Undertone. Season 7, Episode 7. The episode Ocean's 3.5 centers on Bonnie finally giving birth after years of being pregnant. But the moment the baby Susie is born, the scene is interrupted by Quagmire delivering a line that honestly lands with a thud. It's hard to believe she's already 18. The joke is meant to riff on the absurdity of Bonnie's extended pregnancy, how since she's been expecting since the late 90s, so in the show's time the baby would be an adult by now. But because it's delivered by Quagmire of all people, it has a very, inevitably creepy vibe. It's hard to laugh off a notorious F-boy talking this way about a newborn. For one thing, we know that Quagmire often lusts after newly 18-year-old women, so the implication is impossible to ignore. In fact, it suggests that for Quagmire, the only thing standing in the way was a number. But nobody even reacts to the line in the scene, at all. There's no real response to it. Everybody is just too used to him being like this that it's entirely natural for them to hear it. In reality, if someone like Quagmire said that in front of Susie's parents, you can bet he would have his legs broken. Trayvon Watch, Neighborhood Shootout, Season 14, Episode 9. A Shot in the Dark is an episode that does something the show doesn't do often. It parodies a real-life tragedy. Specifically, the 2012 killing of Trayvon Martin and the public outrage that followed. Not really a topic that's ripe for comedy, but when has that ever stopped Family Guy? The episode's premise is as blunt as it gets. Peter, after forming a neighborhood watch with his friends, arms himself, and during a patrol, shoots Cleveland Jr., an unarmed black teenager, mistaking him for a threat. Peter sees a figure trying to get in through a window, yells a warning, and fires. Only then does he realize he's shot someone he knows, and the fallout begins immediately. At the hospital, Cleveland and Donna refuse Peter's apology, calling him a racist. Cleveland Jr. explains he didn't hear Peter because he was wearing headphones, and the window was just a shortcut to avoid letting out air conditioning. The police declare it an accident, but Cleveland goes on local TV pushing the narrative that Peter's actions were motivated by hate. Soon the town turns on Peter and his family, treating them as pariahs. Peter's attempt to prove he isn't racist only makes things worse. He tries to bring Cleveland a peace offering, but ends up setting the Browns' house on fire. His panicked shouts for them to get out are misinterpreted as threats, and an angry crowd gathers outside the Griffin home. To calm the situation, the police arrest Peter, not for justice, but to pacify the community. The episode's airing was delayed twice, first after the 2015 Paris attacks, then again after the San Bernardino shooting, both times due to concerns about airing such controversial material in the wake of real-world violence. Especially since there's no way to misinterpret the episode. The entire story is a raw, direct parody of a genuine tragedy. Quagmire Statutory Rape Charge, Season 13, Episode 7. Quagmire's mom opens with a party where Quagmire meets a girl named Kira. She claims she's 23, but the next day after they've spent the night together, it comes out that she's much younger, as in under the legal age in Rhode Island. Joe, who's both Quagmire's friend and a dedicated cop, shows up at Quagmire's door with backup. Quagmire, proud of his conquest, confesses to what he's done before he even knows what's coming next. Joe arrests him on the spot for being with someone too young. Quagmire is now about to become a convicted felon because he couldn't keep it in his pants. Quagmire's trial quickly becomes a spectacle. His friends try to defend him, but their testimonies go nowhere. Peter is unhelpful, Joe's forced to describe what happened in disturbing detail, and Cleveland refuses to help when the judge's questions turn racially charged. The evidence is clear. Quagmire posted a video online and the judge sentences him to 20 years in prison, revoking his citizenship and labeling him a dangerous offender. Which is true, actually. But then Quagmire's mother, Crystal, bursts into the courtroom. She's a born-again Christian now, yet her past is wild and she pleads for leniency. The judge gives Quagmire 24 hours to get his affairs in order. At home, Crystal tries to save his soul, but Quagmire wants nothing to do with her advice. He prepares for prison, saying goodbye to his neighbors. At the last minute, the judge appears with Crystal and tells Quagmire he's free. His mother's talents have convinced the judge to commute the sentence. Ugh, that's gross. Look, the whole episode is built around real-world crimes that have destroyed lives and how Quagmire is likely to have committed this crime not once, but multiple times. Does the show take it seriously? Not really, but when has it ever? Level 7. Turban Cowboy, Marathon Bombing Gag, Season 11, Episode 16. Turban Cowboy aired just a month before the Boston Marathon tragedy, but it would never air again. Not in its original state, anyway. The episode starts with Peter Griffin befriending Mahmoud, a Muslim man he meets after a skydiving accident. Initially, it's played for laughs and comedy, but things quickly swerve into darker territory when Mahmoud is revealed to be involved in a plot to blow up a bridge in Quahog. Peter, oblivious at first, finds himself entangled in the scheme, handed a cell phone that's actually a detonator. As you would expect, Peter cluelessly detonates multiple explosions by dialing his phone without even thinking about it. But what really set off the controversy was a particular sequence where Peter, in a flashback, is shown winning the Boston Marathon by plowing through runners in his car, leaving chaos behind. Later, he's seen using his phone to trigger those explosions. Although in the original episode these moments aren't directly connected, however, after the real-life Boston bombing, an edited clip started circulating online, splicing these scenes together to make it look like Family Guy had predicted the attack. The mashup went viral, fueling conspiracy theories and outrage. Fox quickly pulled the episode from streaming platforms, and creator Seth MacFarlane denounced the doctored video as abhorrent. But even without the edits, the episode's jokes about bombing plots and mass carnage struck many as shockingly distasteful, especially coming so close to the real event, which they could never have predicted. The episode has never been aired since that original broadcast, making Turban Cowboy one of the most controversial moments in the show's history. Screams of Silence Redux, Domestic Violence Portrayed Seriously, Season 10, Episode 3. The episode Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q, opens with Quagmire in the hospital and his sister Brenda arrives, not alone, but with her boyfriend, Jeff. From the start, Jeff's behavior is brutal and cruel. He belittles Brenda, mocks her in front of others, and his temper is always just under the surface. The show leans heavily into that, showing that Brenda is stuck with someone who tears her down both in private and in front of friends and family. The lines that are supposed to be jokes, like Brenda insisting Jeff is sweet because he's gentle when he hits her, aren't really funny. They feel far too realistic to be a punchline. Attempts to help Brenda go nowhere. Lois tries to reason with her, but Brenda insists everything is fine, even as the evidence piles up to prove it isn't. Joe the cop says there's nothing he can do unless Brenda files a report, which she would never do, leaving the group feeling powerless. An intervention is staged, but Jeff barges in, demands money, and announces he and Brenda are getting married, as if daring anyone to stop him. There's just no way for anybody to break the cycle with common sense and consideration, which is why Quagmire decides there's only one way out. He ropes in Peter and Joe, and together they lure Jeff out on a fishing trip where they kill him. To spare her feelings, Brenda is told he left her. For many watching, this was a shocking and horrifying conclusion, with many believing that the episode essentially justified the ending of someone's life and presented it as if it was the only way to solve the problem. If you're still in the mood for more cartoon fun, why not take a look at this video on the most disturbing cartoon moments?